The Harrington Grand Ballroom had never looked more beautiful or more dishonest. Crystal chandeliers threw prismatic light across 500 white linen tables. Waiters in black moved silently between clusters of Chicago's wealthiest donors, carrying trays of champagne flutes that caught the light like small flames. A string quartet played something soft and forgettable near the east wall, and the air smelled of gardenias and ambition in equal measure. At the center of it all stood Craig Benner, 41 years old, recently remarried, and deeply satisfied with himself. He adjusted the cuffs of his Brioni tuxedo and surveyed the room the way a man surveys territory he believes he owns. Tonight's event, the Bright Hearts Gala, billed as a fundraiser for children's cardiac care, had been his idea. Or rather, it had been his way of ensuring that Diana would have no polite reason to refuse the invitation. He had mailed it 3 weeks ago. Cream envelope, gold lettering, hand-addressed. The invitation read, "In honor of the children who need our help, including our own." He had written that line himself. He knew Diana would read it and feel something complicated, something close to guilt, because to refuse felt like abandoning Noah, and refusing to abandon Noah was the one thing Diana Holloway had never been able to do. "She'll come," he had told Lacey the night they mailed the envelopes. "She'll walk through those doors in something she bought on sale, and she'll stand there looking exactly the way she always has." Tired, desperate, grateful. He paused to sip his wine. "And every person in that room will understand exactly why I moved on." Lacey Voss, his wife of 8 months, had smiled over the rim of her glass. She was 29, a lifestyle influencer with 400,000 followers and a talent for making everything around her look aspirational. She had built her brand on transformation, before and afters, glow-ups, the aesthetics of becoming. She believed firmly in upgrading, and Craig, in her framing, had been her most significant one. She wasn't thinking about Diana as a person. She was thinking about Diana as a visual. A woman in last season's dress standing 20 feet from Lacey's couture gown. The contrast would be self-explanatory. No words needed. What neither of them considered, what it would not have occurred to either of them to consider, was that Diana Holloway had spent the last 18 months becoming something unrecognizable to people who had only ever seen her at her lowest. Diana had married Craig at 27, in a small ceremony outside Cincinnati with her mother crying in the front row. She had believed in him then with the particular devotion of someone who mistakes confidence for character. Craig was ambitious, well-dressed, quick to laugh in rooms full of people who mattered. He made her feel, for a while, like she had been chosen. She had left her position as a 4th-grade teacher when their son Noah was born. Craig's preference, though he framed it as a mutual decision, and spent the next 5 years building a life that belonged, in every practical sense, more to him than to her. She kept the house, managed his calendar, attended dinners with clients, and raised Noah with the focused tenderness of someone who understood, without anyone saying it plainly, that this was the arrangement. She did not understand how brittle the arrangement was until Noah turned 5 and started struggling to breathe during recess. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in November. A congenital heart defect, moderate severity, correctable with surgery. The cardiologist was calm and measured. Diana held Noah's hand and nodded at the right moments and did not let herself cry until she was alone in the hospital parking garage, where she sat in the driver's seat for 40 minutes with the engine off. When she called Craig, he picked up on the 4th ring. She heard noise in the background. A restaurant, voices, ice in a glass. She told him what the doctor had said. There was a pause. "I'll look at the insurance when I get home," he said. He didn't come home that night. Within 3 months, he had filed for divorce. He cited irreconcilable differences, which was true only in the sense that Diana still believed their son's illness was a reason to stay, and Craig had decided it was a reason to leave. He kept the joint account, the investment portfolio, and the lake house. She kept Noah, the Honda Civic, and a legal bill she couldn't afford to pay. What she did not find out until 8 months later, when the hospital's billing department called about a gap in Noah's coverage, was that Craig had quietly removed Noah from his employer's health plan 2 weeks before filing for divorce. He had replaced it with a bare minimum individual policy that didn't cover cardiac surgery. The gap was not a clerical error. The gap was deliberate. By then, Diana had moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she had never lived in before. Noah slept in the bedroom. She slept on a pull-out sofa and pretended she didn't mind it. She worked 3 jobs: substitute teaching during the day, bookkeeping remotely at night, and on weekends, tutoring the children of people who had once been her social equals. She did not tell Noah they were struggling. She told him they were on an adventure. He believed her because he was 6, and she was his mother, and she said it with conviction. The surgery Noah needed cost $240,000. Diana spent 4 months writing appeals, gathering documentation, calling insurance company representatives, who put her on hold and then disconnected. She kept a legal pad by the phone with every name, every date, every reference number. She did not stop. It was at the hospital, on an afternoon in February, that Diana met Dr. Ethan Prescott for the first time. She was in the hallway outside the cardiac unit, sitting in a plastic chair with the legal pad in her lap, and a cold cup of coffee on the floor beside her, reading through Noah's most recent chart notes. She had taught herself enough medical vocabulary by then to follow most of it. She was making notes in the margin, in her small, precise handwriting, when she heard someone stop. "You're Noah's mother." She looked up. Ethan Prescott was 47, lean and unhurried in the way of someone who had spent decades making difficult things look manageable. He was the chief of pediatric cardiac surgery at Northwestern, which Diana knew because she had researched every cardiac surgeon in a 2-state radius. "I've been reviewing his case," Ethan said. He didn't sit down. He stood with his hands in the pockets of his white coat, looking at her with the focused attention of someone accustomed to reading situations quickly. "He's a good candidate for the repair. Strong baseline." "I know," Diana said. "I've read everything I can find." He looked at the legal pad. "What are those?" "Insurance records, dates of coverage, lapses." She paused. "I'm building a case that my ex-husband deliberately canceled our son's health coverage before filing for divorce. If I can document it properly, I may be able to pursue fraud charges that would force his employer's insurance to retroactively cover the surgery." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Have you found a lawyer?" "One who will work on contingency if I can get the documentation together first." He was still looking at her, not with pity. She had learned to recognize pity very quickly over the past 18 months and to close herself against it. This was something else. Recognition, perhaps. "My daughter had the same defect," he said. "She was 3, 20 years ago." He stopped there. He didn't finish the sentence, and he didn't need to. The way he said it finished it for him. Diana looked at him. "I'll operate on Noah," Ethan said. "Pro bono. I'll work with the hospital foundation to cover the facility costs." He said it the way he might say the next step in a clinical protocol. Not dramatic, not performative, simply the thing that needed to happen. "Why?" Diana said. "Because I can," Ethan said, "and because someone should have done this a long time ago." The surgery was scheduled for April. Noah came through it in 4 hours and 40 minutes. Diana sat in the waiting room with her hands folded and her eyes dry, because she had decided she would not cry until she was sure it was over and he was safe. When Ethan came out in his scrubs and told her that Noah was in recovery and doing beautifully, Diana put her face in her hands and wept so hard, her shoulders shook. Ethan sat down beside her and didn't say anything. He let her cry. When she finally stopped, he handed her a folded square of paper from his coat pocket. It was a drawing Noah had made before going into surgery, a man in a white coat flying like a superhero over a city skyline, crayon-colored and slightly lopsided. "He gave it to me this morning," Ethan said. "I told him I'd keep it. I wanted you to see it first." It was in the weeks after Noah's surgery, the follow-up appointments, the slow walks back toward ordinary life, that Diana began to understand that Ethan Prescott was not a symbol or a category. He was a person who had carried his own losses quietly for a long time and who had found, after years of building walls, that he was tired of living inside them. When Craig's invitation arrived, Diana almost didn't open it. She held it for a long moment over the kitchen trash can. She recognized the handwriting on the envelope. She read the words in honor of the children who need our help, including our own, and something in her went very still. She put the invitation on the counter and called Ethan. The night of the gala, The black car Ethan arranged arrived at Diana's apartment at 7:15. Noah was at her mother's house. Diana stood in the doorway of her bedroom and looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. She wore a deep burgundy gown that a colleague of Ethan's had insisted she borrow for the evening. The fabric was simple and perfectly fitted. She had done her own hair and her own makeup, the way she always had, but she had taken her time tonight. She looked like herself, only more so, like a version of herself that hadn't had to be afraid in a while. When she got into the car, Ethan looked at her without speaking for a moment. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm going." The Harrington Grand came into view as they turned onto Michigan Avenue, its entrance lit with tall arrangements of white flowers. Diana saw the photographers clustered by the doors and felt her pulse rise, and then deliberately settle. Ethan held the door. He offered his arm. She took it. The moment they stepped into the lobby, a current moved through the crowd. That particular shift in attention that happens when something unexpected walks into a room. People turned. Some recognized Ethan. He was well known in certain circles. Some recognized the bearing of someone who has decided not to flinch. Craig was standing near the reception table when Diana came through the inner doors. She watched the exact moment he saw her. His expression didn't collapse so much as deflate, the smugness leaving like air from a slow puncture. Lacey, at his elbow, narrowed her eyes. Craig recovered quickly. He had always been good at recovery. He moved toward Diana with his hand extended and his smile reconstructed. "Diana," he said, "I'm so glad you made it." He looked at Ethan with an assessing glance that he tried to make casual and didn't quite manage. "I don't think we've met." "Dr. Ethan Prescott," Ethan said pleasantly. He shook Craig's hand. "I operated on your son." The room around them was not quite paying attention, but it was close. Craig's smile tightened. "Yes, well," he turned to Diana, "I hope Noah is recovering well. That's really what tonight is about, isn't it? Children like him, children who need our help." He said it with the air of a man landing a point. Around them, a few guests murmured agreement. Diana looked at him steadily. "Children who need our help," she repeated. "Yes." There was something in her voice that made Craig look at her more carefully. She had always been easier to read than this. She had always let him see her. He began to turn toward the podium, toward the program he had scripted, when Ethan spoke. "Mr. Benner," his voice was conversational. "Even, before you address the room about children's cardiac care, there's something your guests should be aware of." The quartet had paused between movements. In the gap, Ethan's voice carried. "Your son's health insurance coverage was terminated 14 days before you filed for divorce. The policy that replaced it excluded pre-existing cardiac conditions." He paused. "Noah's surgery was delayed by 11 months because of that gap in coverage. 11 months during which his condition worsened. During which his mother worked 3 jobs and slept on a sofa and filed appeals to insurance companies while you attended events like this one." The room was very quiet now. Craig's face had gone a particular shade, not red with anger, not white with shock, but a grayish color Diana had never seen on him before. "That's a mischaracterization," he said, his voice finding its footing. "Insurance paperwork is complicated. There was an administrative error." "There was no administrative error," Ethan said. "The cancellation was submitted in writing by you, 14 days before filing. I have the documentation. So does Diana's attorney." He looked around the room calmly. "I thought you should all know, given that you're here tonight in the name of children's cardiac care, what kind of person organized this event." For a moment, no one moved. Then Lacey moved. She took 2 steps back from Craig. The distance was small and enormous at the same time. "You told me that was an insurance company mistake," she said. Her voice was different than it had been all evening, stripped of the social register she usually performed. "You said the hospital got everything sorted, and you felt terrible about the delay." She looked at him. "You said that." "Lacey?" "You let me believe that," she said. She looked around the room. The cameras, the phones, the careful social calculations of 500 witnesses. A lifestyle influencer understood, perhaps better than anyone, that a moment like this would not stay in this room. "I'm not going to stand here," she said. She left. Her heels on the marble floor were very loud in the silence. Craig turned back to face the room. He was trying to locate the version of himself that commanded spaces like this, but it wasn't available to him anymore. The man who had stood at the center of this ballroom 2 hours earlier, surveying his triumph, was not the man that the people standing closest to him could now see. "This event," said a white-haired woman near the front, a senior donor who had funded 3 hospital wings and had no patience for performance, "should perhaps conclude for the evening." The room began to empty, not all at once but steadily. Donors drifting toward exits, conversations dropping to murmurs, the catering staff suddenly very busy with their own tasks. Craig stood at the center of the thinning ballroom for a long moment, looking at Diana. She looked back at him without cruelty and without satisfaction, because she had stopped needing either of those things. She just looked at him the way you look at someone you spent a long time being afraid of, when the fear has finally and completely left you. The insurance fraud investigation, built on 18 months of Diana's meticulous notes, every name and date and reference number on that legal pad, moved forward in the weeks that followed. Craig's employer launched its own internal review. His name became the thing people mentioned quietly when they wanted to explain why they no longer trusted a certain kind of polished confidence. Lacey posted a video on her channel. No ring light, no backdrop, just her sitting at her kitchen table, in which she said she had been lied to, that she was not willing to be associated with what had happened to a child, and that she was sorry she hadn't asked harder questions earlier. The response was complicated, as these things always are. But she asked the questions. That was something. Diana did not follow any of it closely. She had Noah's follow-up appointments to attend, and a meeting with her attorney, and a conversation she needed to have with her mother, who had been asking careful questions about Ethan Prescott for several weeks. One evening in early June, Diana sat on the steps of her apartment building, while Noah played with a neighbor's dog on the sidewalk below. The air was warm and smelled like someone nearby was grilling, and the sky was doing something complicated and beautiful with the last of the light. Ethan sat beside her on the step. They had gotten into the habit of this, sitting somewhere ordinary together, talking about nothing urgent. "He asked me today if you were going to be around a lot," Diana said. "What did you tell him?" She looked at her son, who was laughing at something the dog had done, his small face entirely open. "I told him that was up to you." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Then yes," he said, "if that's all right with you, I'd like to be around a lot." Diana nodded slowly. She had learned over the past 2 years to be careful with hope, to hold it at a distance, until she could verify it was real. But she was also learning slowly that some things were allowed to be as straightforward as they appeared, that not every door with light under it was a trap. "Okay," she said. Noah ran back up the steps and wedged himself between them, slightly breathless, smelling of sunshine. He looked up at Ethan with the direct, uncomplicated assessment of a 7-year-old. "Do you know how to play Go Fish?" he said. "I'm a quick learner," Ethan said. Noah seemed to find this acceptable. He stood up and went inside, presumably to find the cards, and Diana and Ethan sat in the warm evening air and did not say anything for a while, which was its own kind of language, the kind that only exists between people who have stopped pretending they are fine and started, carefully, to be. That was where Diana's story turned. Not in the ballroom, not in the moment Craig's name became a cautionary tale. It turned here on a Tuesday evening in June, on the front steps of a building she could barely afford, with her son laughing somewhere inside and the sky going gold around the edges. She had spent 18 months being the woman Craig assumed would break. She had broken, in some ways. But she had not stayed broken, which was the thing Craig had never understood about her, had never bothered to understand. The resilience was not in spite of the breaking. It was built from it. Craig had looked at her and seen someone disposable. He had been wrong, as people who see only surfaces tend to be. What he had thrown away was not a quiet wife who would dissolve quietly. What he had thrown away was a woman who kept a legal pad by the phone and wrote down every name and every date and did not stop, even when the person she was fighting for could not yet understand what was being fought for. Noah understood now. He was 7, and he understood more than 7-year-olds usually have to. He knew that his mother had not left when things got hard. He knew that she had sat in parking garages and cried, and then started the car and driven home and made dinner anyway. He would carry that knowledge his whole life, in the specific way children carry the things they witness before they have words for them. That was the inheritance Diana had left him. Not a lake house, not an investment portfolio, something that could not be emptied from an account or assigned in a divorce proceeding. The sky finished going gold and turned a deep and quiet blue. Down on the sidewalk, the neighbor's dog barked once at something, and then was still. From inside the apartment, faintly, came the sound of cards being shuffled. Diana stood up. Ethan stood up beside her. They went inside.